Part 1: The Loss. The phone rang in the dead of night. That's never a good sign. I glanced at the clock, 3:42 a.m., and groaned, assuming it was a drunk friend or maybe a wrong number. But as soon as I picked it up, the voice on the other end shattered my world. Mrs. Daniels? It was a police officer. His tone was that awful mix of practiced calm and weighty seriousness. Yes, this is she, I replied, already clutching the bedsheet like it might keep me tethered to reality. There's been an accident, he said, and with those 4 words, my life split into a before and an after. My parents and my younger brother, Sam, had been driving home from a family dinner. A semi-truck lost control on an icy overpass and hit them head-on. There were no survivors. No survivors. I don't remember much of what came next. Kevin woke up to find me curled on the floor, phone still clutched in my hand. He pried it away from me, but I couldn't even form the words to explain. All I could do was cry. The days following were a whirlwind of planning funerals, meeting lawyers, and dealing with the kind of condolences that felt more like daggers than comfort. I'd always thought grief would be like in the movies. Cathartic sobbing, surrounded by loved ones. Instead, it was cold, numbing, like trying to swim in wet concrete. Then came the letter. It was from my parents' lawyer, explaining the inheritance they had left behind. $3 million, to be divided equally between Sam and me. With him gone, it was all mine. It didn't feel like a blessing, it felt like a slap in the face. What use was money when the people I loved most were gone? I didn't even open the rest of the documents. I shoved the papers into a drawer and tried to forget they existed. But Kevin didn't forget. First, he seemed supportive. He held me when I cried, helped organize the endless logistics, even fielded calls when I couldn't bear to answer the phone. But his questions started creeping in earlier than I expected. Did the lawyer say when the funds would be released? He asked one evening, his voice careful, like he was testing the waters. I blinked at him, confused. Why would that matter right now? He hesitated. No reason. Just wondering. I let it go, chalking it up to his practicality. But then it happened again. And again. You should talk to the lawyer soon, he said one morning as I stared blankly at a photo of my family. Just to make sure everything is in order. I will, I muttered, though the thought of dealing with the inheritance made my stomach churn. When I finally did sit down with the lawyer, it felt surreal hearing him list numbers and assets, as if he were talking about someone else's life. I signed the necessary papers, nodded when he asked if I understood, and walked out of the office in a daze. The money was officially mine. I told Kevin that evening, thinking it might bring closure. Instead, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Something I didn't recognize, but it made my heart sink. $3 million, he said, as if tasting the words. That's life-changing. For the first time, I wondered if he was mourning with me or calculating. Part 2: The Demand. For a few blissful days, Kevin said nothing more about the money. He acted like his usual self, kind, attentive, and even a little more present than usual. He brought me tea when I couldn't sleep and rubbed my back when I woke up crying. It felt like he was giving me the space I needed to grieve. But looking back, I should have noticed the cracks forming. The way his eyes lingered on me just a second too long when I mentioned anything about the lawyer. The way his questions, though casual at first, started to edge toward a familiar topic. What do you think your parents would have wanted you to do with the money? He asked one evening as we ate dinner in awkward silence. The question caught me off guard. I hadn't even touched the inheritance since signing the paperwork. It sat in a special account, unreachable until I decided what to do. I don't know, I replied honestly. I can't even think about it right now. Kevin nodded, chewing slowly, but there was something calculating about the way he set down his fork. I think they'd want you to use it to make your life better, he said. Maybe do something for us for our future. There it was, the crack splitting wider. What are you talking about? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm just saying, he continued, his tone maddeningly calm, that this could be an opportunity. We could pay off the house, invest, maybe even start that business I've been dreaming about. Remember? The one we always said we'd do together. The mention of his dream business made my stomach twist. Kevin had floated the idea before, a luxury travel agency or something equally risky, but we'd never seriously pursued it because we didn't have the capital. Now I realized he saw the inheritance as his golden ticket. I put down my fork, appetite gone. Kevin, my family just died. I can't even think about spending that money right now. His jaw tightened, but he forced a smile. Of course. I understand. I thought it might help to focus on the future instead of the past. The word stung. Was he really implying I should just move on? I pushed my chair back from the table, needing space. That night, as I lay awake in bed, I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. Kevin wasn't heartless. He just didn't understand the depth of my grief. Still, his words echoed in my head, unsettling and insistent. But the next day, the pressure began to build. Have you thought any more about what I said? He asked over breakfast, his tone casual but his eyes laser-focused on me. About what? I replied, feigning ignorance. The money, he said, as if it were obvious. It's just sitting there. And I was thinking. Kevin, stop, I snapped, cutting him off. I don't want to talk about this right now. He raised his hands defensively, but the tension was palpable. I'm just trying to help. It's a lot of money, and it seems wasteful not to do something meaningful with it. It's my money, I said sharply, the words tasting foreign and bitter. His face darkened for the briefest moment before he forced a smile. Of course it is. I'm just thinking about us, that's all. But it didn't feel like he was thinking about us. It felt like he was thinking about himself. The following week, his casual suggestions turned into outright demands. He began leaving brochures for financial advisors on the kitchen counter and sending me links to investment opportunities. One evening, he even walked into the living room with a notepad, ready to present a full-blown business proposal. Kevin, I'm not doing this, I said, cutting him off before he could start. Stop treating me like an ATM. His eyes narrowed. You're being ridiculous, he snapped. Do you know how many people would kill to have this kind of money? You're just letting it rot. I'm letting it be, I shot back. Because I'm still grieving, Kevin. My entire family is gone. Can you not see that? Don't you think your parents would want you to do something with it? To honor their memory? The audacity of the question took my breath away. How dare you use my parents against me? I hissed. He didn't reply. Instead, he stormed out of the room, muttering something about me being unreasonable. That night, I cried myself to sleep, wondering how I had ended up married to someone who could be so selfish. But deep down, I knew the answer. Kevin hadn't changed overnight. He had always been like this. I had just been too blind to see it. Part 3: Pressure Points. The tension between Kevin and me grew thicker with every passing day. At first, I thought he'd given up after our last argument. For a few blissful mornings, he didn't mention the inheritance, and I started to think he had finally understood how deeply I needed time to grieve. But I should have known better. Kevin wasn't the kind of man to let go of something once he'd set his sights on it. It started small, sly remarks. Little jabs slipped into everyday conversations. I saw an article today, he said one evening while scrolling on his phone. Apparently, people who sit on large sums of money instead of investing it lose a ton to inflation. Isn't that crazy? I didn't even look up from my book. Kevin, I'm not having this conversation. It's not a conversation, he replied, his voice a little too breezy. I'm just saying money doesn't grow itself, you know? Another time, I caught him on the phone with someone. When I walked into the room, he abruptly ended the call, slipping his phone into his pocket like a teenager caught breaking curfew. Who was that? I asked suspiciously. Just a financial advisor, he said, avoiding my gaze. Are you serious? I asked, crossing my arms. You're talking to financial advisors about my inheritance? Our inheritance, he corrected, his voice laced with irritation. No, Kevin. It's not ours. It's mine. The words felt harsh coming out, but they were the truth. His lips pressed into a thin line. Well, excuse me for trying to look out for our future, he muttered before walking out of the room. It was a constant battle, him pushing me, pulling away. Every conversation, no matter how innocuous it started, seemed to circle back to the money. And the more he pushed, the more I started to see sides of Kevin I didn't like. One evening, we were watching TV together, something we hadn't done in weeks. A commercial came on about a couple buying their dream home. Kevin leaned over, his tone casual but pointed. That could be us, you know. If we just used a little of the money for a down payment, we could finally get out of this place. I turned to him, feeling the heat rise in my chest. What's wrong with this place? Nothing, he said quickly. I just thought you'd want to upgrade. You deserve better, don't you think? I could see the game he was playing, trying to frame it like he was doing this for me. but I wasn't falling for it. I like this house, I said firmly. He sighed dramatically, throwing his head back against the couch. You're impossible to talk to about this. Good, I shot back, standing up and leaving the room. The final straw came one Saturday morning. I had been up late the night before, poring over old photo albums of my family, crying until my eyes were swollen and raw. When I came downstairs, Kevin was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and a laptop. What are you doing? I asked, my voice hoarse. He looked up, smiling like a salesman about to pitch a deal. I've been doing some research and I found a way we can invest the money that's practically foolproof. If we move quickly, we could double your inheritance in less than 5 years. I stared at him, incredulous. You're kidding, right? No, he said, genuinely confused by my reaction. This is a great opportunity. Kevin, I'm not doing this. How many times do I have to tell you? He stood up, frustration bubbling to the surface. Why are you being so stubborn? Do you know how much easier our lives could be if you just stop clinging to that money like it's some kind of sacred relic? Because it is sacred to me. I yelled, my voice cracking. It's the last thing I have of my family, Kevin. How can you not understand that? They're gone, Laura, he shouted back, his words hitting me like a slap. No amount of money is going to bring them back. You need to stop acting like you're the only one who matters here. This inheritance could change everything for us, but instead you're just letting it sit there while we scrape by. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. His words weren't just cruel, they were revealing. In that moment I saw him for who he truly was. A man who saw my grief as an inconvenience and my inheritance as a tool for his ambition. I'm done talking about this, I said quietly, my voice trembling with barely contained anger. If you bring it up again, we're going to have a serious problem. He didn't respond. Instead, he sat back down, slamming the lid of his laptop shut. The sound echoed through the kitchen, a punctuation mark on an argument that was far from over. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control, about respect, about the foundation of our marriage. And I was starting to realize that foundation might not be as solid as I had once believed. What would you have done if you were in Laura's position? Would you have confronted Kevin sooner or handled it differently? Write in the comments. Part 4, Breaking Point. The silence between Kevin and me lasted all of 2 days. At first, I thought he was giving me space, maybe reflecting on how out of line he had been. But deep down, I knew better. Kevin didn't back off when he wanted something. He recalibrated. Sure enough, the quiet soon gave way to his next move. It started with a text. I'm sorry about the way I spoke to you the other day. Can we have a nice dinner tonight? My treat. I stared at the message for a long time, suspicious but tired of fighting. Part of me wanted to believe he was finally coming to his senses, that maybe he realized how much his relentless focus on the money was hurting me. So I replied with a simple, okay. That evening, Kevin came home with a bottle of wine and a bag of groceries, 2 things he rarely brought without a specific reason. He insisted on cooking dinner, even though his usual contribution to meals was reheating takeout. The sight of him bustling around the kitchen in an apron almost made me laugh, but the knot of unease in my stomach kept me grounded. When we finally sat down to eat, he raised his glass with a smile that was almost too perfect. To us, he said, clinking his wine glass against mine. To us, I echoed, though my voice lacked his enthusiasm. For a while we talked about safe topics, the weather, a Netflix series we've been watching, even plans for the weekend. It felt almost normal, like the version of us from before all of this. But as the plates were cleared and Kevin refilled our glasses, his expression shifted. So, he said, leaning forward slightly, I've been thinking about the money. I froze, my stomach twisting into knots. Kevin, don't. Just hear me out, he interrupted, raising a hand as if to ward off my protests. I know we've had our disagreements about this, but I've been doing a lot of research, and I really think I've found a solution that benefits both of us. Kevin, I said, my voice low in warning, we agreed not to talk about this again. He ignored me, pulling out a folder from the side of his chair and sliding it across the table. Just look. I'm not asking you to decide tonight. I just want you to see what's possible. I stared at the folder like it was a snake, coiled and ready to strike. What part of no don't you understand? I asked, my voice trembling with anger. Kevin sighed, his face tightening. Why are you being so difficult about this? Difficult? I repeated, my voice rising. You're the one who won't drop it. My entire family is gone, Kevin, and all you care about is their money. Do you even hear yourself? I'm thinking about our future, he snapped, his tone losing all pretense of gentleness. I'm trying to make sure we have something to build on. But you're so wrapped up in your grief that you can't see the bigger picture. I pushed back my chair, the screech of the legs against the floor cutting through the tension like a knife. You don't care about our future, Kevin. You care about what you can get out of this. He stood up too, his face darkening with frustration. That's not fair, Laura. Everything I've done for us. You're acting like I'm some kind of monster. Because you're acting like one. I shouted, my voice breaking. You can't even pretend to care about what I'm going through. You just see dollar signs. For a moment, the kitchen was silent except for the sound of my heavy breathing. Kevin stared at me, his face a mixture of anger and disbelief. You know what? He said finally, his voice cold and biting. Maybe I do care about the money. But someone has to, because clearly you're incapable of thinking rationally right now. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there, stunned, as he grabbed his glass of wine and walked out of the room, leaving me alone in the wreckage of what had once been our marriage. That night, I slept on the couch, clutching a blanket that still smelled faintly of my parents' house. I cried until I had no tears left, the weight of grief and betrayal pressing down on me like a crushing wave. The next morning, I woke up to find Kevin already gone. On the kitchen table, he'd left a note. We need to figure this out. Call me when you're ready to talk like an adult. I stared at the note, my hands trembling. He didn't see me as a partner. He didn't see my grief as valid. To Kevin, I was nothing more than an obstacle standing between him and the life he thought he deserved. For the first time since the accident, I felt something other than sorrow. I felt anger, white-hot and righteous. And with that anger came clarity. Kevin wasn't going to stop. Not unless I stopped him. This wasn't just a disagreement anymore. It was a battle for control, and I wasn't about to let him win. If you were Laura's friend, what advice would you have given her during this situation? Part 5, The Realization. I didn't call Kevin. I couldn't. His note, with its patronizing demand to talk like an adult, made me sick to my stomach. Instead, I went to see Emily, my best friend. When I told her everything, the accident, the inheritance, Kevin's demands, her jaw dropped. Laura, I don't want to overstep, but what's wrong with him? You're grieving, and he's treating you like a bank account. Her words hit me hard. He wasn't always like this, I said weakly, but even as I said it, doubt crept in. Had I been ignoring who Kevin really was? That night, alone in our quiet house, I started reflecting on our marriage. Kevin's charm and ambition had swept me off my feet years ago, but now I couldn't help but see the selfish patterns I'd ignored, pressuring me to support his failed ventures, dismissing my feelings when they conflicted with his goals. The next day I saw a therapist. I told her everything and she listened patiently. Laura, she said, it sounds like you're carrying grief and a partner who's not supporting you. It's okay to put yourself first right now. Her words were a revelation. But the final straw came that evening when Kevin texted, I'm meeting with a financial planner tomorrow. It's time to stop being emotional and start being practical. We'll talk when I get home. I stared at the message, feeling a wave of rage and clarity wash over me. Kevin wasn't just pushing me. He was disregarding me entirely. Emily's voice rang in my head. This isn't about money, it's about respect. I knew then I couldn't keep pretending. Kevin didn't see me as a grieving wife. He saw me as an obstacle. It wasn't about saving the marriage anymore. It was about saving myself. That night I made my decision. It was time to stop clinging to the idea of who Kevin could be and face the reality of who he was. It was terrifying, but I knew I had to take the leap, this time for me. Part 6, The Result. The day Kevin was supposed to meet with the financial planner, I decided it was time to confront him once and for all. I had spent the night before packing a bag, just in case. It felt surreal, folding clothes and stashing essentials into a duffel, like I was preparing for a weekend trip instead of what might be the end of my marriage. When Kevin came home, he didn't even notice the bag tucked discreetly by the door. He waltzed into the house, all confidence and self-satisfaction, tossing his keys on the counter. Well, he said with a grin, I've got great news. The financial planner loved my ideas. He even said, Stop, I said, cutting him off. My voice was firm and it surprised even me. Kevin froze, looking at me like I just slapped him. What? We're not doing this, I said. You're not making plans for my inheritance like it's yours to control. And we're certainly not going to pretend this is about us anymore. His grin vanished, replaced by a defensive scowl. What the hell are you talking about? I'm trying to help you. You're so wrapped up in your emotions, you can't even think clearly. Don't, I snapped, my voice sharp. Don't you dare call this grief an excuse or imply that I'm being irrational. I lost my entire family, Kevin. And instead of standing by me, you've been harassing me about money. Kevin's face turned red. That's not fair, he shot back. I'm trying to look out for our future, Laura. Someone has to. You're acting like I don't have a say in this, like I'm not your husband. You're right, I said coldly. You don't have a say in this. Because you're not acting like my husband. You're acting like someone who only sees me as a means to an end. For a moment the room was silent, the weight of my words hanging between us. Kevin stared at me, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. So what? He finally said, his voice dripping with bitterness. You're just going to walk away? Throw everything we've built away over this? I took a deep breath, my hands trembling but my resolve solid. What exactly have we built, Kevin? A life where you make all the decisions? A marriage where my feelings don't matter? Because that's not a life I want anymore. His laugh was harsh and humorless. You're being ridiculous. You're going to ruin everything because I care about our future. No, I said, standing tall. I'm ending this because you don't care about me. I picked up the duffel bag, slinging it over my shoulder. Kevin's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. You're not serious, he said, his voice shaky now. Where are you even going to go? That's none of your concern, I replied, heading for the door. I'll be in touch about the paperwork. Laura, wait, he said, his tone desperate now. We can fix this. I'll back off, I promise. Just don't. I turned to face him, my hand on the doorknob. Kevin, you've already shown me who you are. And I deserve better. With that I walked out, leaving him standing in the doorway, stunned. Do you think Laura made the right decision to leave Kevin? Why or why not?